in an increasingly dangerous and divided world. Where have I heard that one? Oh, that sounds like every press release from our current government in Canada these days. But they're actually admitting something really important there. I know that they're talking about the entire world, and of course they're trying to portray it as Donald Trump bad, Orange Man bad, but they're actually talking about this country too when they say in an increasingly dangerous and divided world. They're admitting something very important here, that we don't have a unified vision, we don't have shared values in this country. And I know a lot of people are going to come at me for that. I've said this actually quite a few times now, that we don't have a shared purpose in this country. And this is something that's really been bugging me for quite a long time, that we don't have this common goal and this common culture in Canada. And I've been actually doing quite a lot of research on this. And this is something that the whole team and I are on a journey here. We're trying to figure out what is Canada's culture and what should we be. And we come across something really interesting. And the whole idea of what is Canada's culture, who we are as a country, that has actually been a problem for a really long time. Like, as soon as we were founded, we had this problem. And I can prove it. All right? And shout out to my editor for coming up with this. But in my hands right now, I have a very old book. This here was not only written, but also printed in about the 1890s. So this is well over 100 years old. And it was written about our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. And it is titled Canada's Patriot Statesman, The Life and Career of the Right Honourable Sir John A. Macdonald. And believe it or not, this actually paints a very favorable view of our first Prime Minister. And oh my goodness, that is quite a shocking thing that anyone would have that sort of opinion of him, but he was quite loved. And this was printed shortly after his death. And it details his life. It's an extremely interesting book. The introduction is even more interesting. So I'm going to read you a few bits. And this is obviously complicated language. This is the 1890s, so this is a lot more complicated and a lot smarter sounding than we typically write today, but I'll try and explain it all for you. Okay. So see if this rings any bells. Nationality, we know, is more a sentiment than anything else. And in these days of leveling democracy, predilections of sentiment are bound to manifest themselves. So what that's saying there is that patriotism, nationality, or love for a country is a feeling, and that as they're drawing out of the founding era, out of the beginning of Confederation, they're going to see the beginnings, the inklings of a patriotism or nationalism, but they're not seeing it yet. So this is decades after the Confederation has happened. This is after the death of John A. Macdonald. We're like 30 years into this experiment, and they still haven't seen nationalism come up, but they're hoping that it will. One thing is clear, that a nation, an established nation, a sovereign nation, in all things has the advantage over a colony. Why Canada remains, in theory, a colony, while she has all but the status of a nation, is one of those puzzles hard to make out. Confederation was a step, but not an ultimate one, in the evolution of a nation. What prevents Canada from taking the ultimate step? The most manifest evil of the colonial state is the repression of national sentiment. So Canada, yes, we attained nation status in 1867, but even here in 1890, they're still saying we're basically a colony. We basically were attached to Great Britain for a really, really long time. Even up to like World War I, we still had this great attachment, and that continued for a little bit longer. And then we kind of sort of detached ourselves a little bit more. But we still had that colonial sentiment. So what this is saying is that when you are a colony, that sort of patriotism is repressed, okay? And the lack of national sentiment in Canada, with all the indifference that marks its absence, we hold to be one of the anti-national faces of Confederation. There is plenty of British sentiment, and in a section of the Dominion, perhaps more Gaelic sentiment than the country is well aware of. So right there, that is the marker of multiculturalism. So we have the British sentiment, we have Gaelic sentiment, but we don't see a Canadian sentiment, and that is what he's marking here. And it's interesting because right now that's something that's continued in Canada. We have everyone in their little slots. We have the Germans, we have the Italians, we have the Serbians, we have the Indians, we have Native Americans. Everyone is in their little slot, and we're holding on to our own individual cultures, but not sharing an actual national culture. So that started back in this time, and it has continued till today. But of an ardent and widespread Canadian sentiment, there is, what we fear, a little. In its place, we have an ever-active sectional feeling and a tightening of provincial boundary lines, which, overstepped at all, are overstepped on the way of the Dominion Treasury. Now, this is talking about federal funds, okay? Widely extended as are the provinces of the Dominion, and as yet but sparsely and poorly populated, it is perhaps to be expected that the connection of the extremities with the heart of the country shall be one that seeks the sources of life. This explains that. Nourishment for the enfeebled no one will withhold. So that's welfare for someone who cannot better himself. No one will withhold that. But let us be sure that the dole of the Treasury, this is talking about the federal Treasury, so federal funds, goes to the enfeebled and not to the wanton and the prodigal. So this is saying that our federal funds, our welfare, should go to those who desperately need it, not to the wanton, so those who don't want to work, and not to the prodigal, those who waste away their living. All right, so self-reliance will come with self-sustenance. And with the latter, doubtless, a vigorous life and a more pronounced nationalism. Now, I've got to stop there, okay? That is basically an epiphany. So what this is saying here is that when someone is self-reliant and sustaining themselves, they will have a much stronger feeling of independence, and with that, a much stronger feeling of patriotism. Recently, we were in Alberta, and this is something that I noticed out there. There's a lot more independence, a lot more self-reliance, and a lot deeper of a culture. That is literally a living proof that this statement is true. That when someone builds something and truly pours their everything into something, they're going to have a deeper appreciation for that thing. So that holds true for a country, that if a country is full of people that work really hard to build that country and to make it successful, those very people will have a deeper appreciation for their country and a greater love for it. And that's where that nationalism comes from. So that's why we see that in Alberta. That's why there's an independence movement. And actually this gets to that sort of feeling of independence. And it's super interesting, and we'll get to that. But the reason that Alberta has such a deeper culture than much of the rest of Canada is because they have that sort of self-reliance and that independence. We don't see that sort of feeling in Ontario, where we are, especially right now. There is not that deep connection to the land and that deep desire to improve it. And we see that sort of deep connection in places like Alberta and Newfoundland and a few smaller communities, but not widespread throughout our country. And as a result, we don't have that national pride. And when the current government says, oh, it's a dangerous and divided world, they're admitting that we don't have this deep unified culture. They're admitting it, even though they say that we do have some sort of Canadian patriotism. But that really makes me think that this whole elbows up movement is really, in fact, a fake patriotism. There is no real love for this country. There is no real desire to improve it. I will just repeat this statement because it is so good. Self-reliance will come with self-sustenance, and with the latter, self-sustenance, doubtless, a vigorous life and a more pronounced nationalism. Self-sustenance, however, may breed self-sufficiency, and this again, if our rulers are not careful, may bring in its train disaffection and finally secession. If the Confederation is to be proof against this, it will be by assiduous inculcation of national sentiment and by the diffusion of a spirit of patriotism, which can only come of fervent nationality and a full-bodied national life. So what this is saying is that self-sufficiency, if it's not cared for, if it's not drawn into a full-fledged patriotism for the entire country, if it's just allocated to one area or one section, then that section, that self-sufficient area, will be prone to seceding. And guess what? Wake up call, that's exactly what we're seeing. We are seeing places like Alberta, Newfoundland, and Quebec. They want to be self-sufficient, fully self-sufficient. And in the case of Alberta, they are. And they don't have a sort of patriotism that draws them to love the entire country. They just have that patriotism to love that area and want to save and preserve that area. And I understand that. I completely understand that. But it's because the rest of the country doesn't have that sort of deep-rooted self-sufficiency that we're seeing this problem. So the cure here is not to get rid of self-sufficiency, is not to push down freedom. The whole cure is to give everyone else a freedom and a self-sufficiency and a love for the country. That's the cure, but that's not what we're seeing right now. Among other untoward aspects of the present experiment in government is the attitude we have hinted at of certain provinces looking now and again to the federal treasury for better terms. So, wanting more handouts. If the only real union we are to have is one that gathers around the office of the Minister of Finance and plays snapdragon from the federal chest, then the Confederation is confessed a failure and the end is not far off. So, if certain parts of this country decide that all they want is from the federal government is welfare and more handouts, then Confederation, the end of it is not far off. So guess what? We're seeing that as well. This is like, I swear, this feels prophetic. The fact that he's saying that if a part of the country gets to the point where it wants more money, then the rest of the country is going to have to pay for it. And that's going to drive so much sinister, so much ill will that the end of Confederation will not be far off and everything will fall apart. The exigencies of party have made this game playing an expensive sport to the country, and its most sinister aspects are seen in the case of the sister province of Quebec, where burdensome grants have been made to its bankruptcy on the plea of recouping it for railways built and afterwards sold to the Dominion, the money being wrung from the federal treasury as the price of the sectional party vote. Aggressive raids of this kind, with the political immortality that brands them, are bound to have a disastrous effect on the Confederation. Now, this is talking about Quebec, and even back then, Quebec is asking for more money, and it gets into why Quebec is so aggressive, and the whole hostility between Quebec and the rest of the English-speaking parts of Canada, it's very old. It's a very old grievance, and it is going on here, and this talks about it. In the case of Quebec, the evil is aggravated by racial jealousy, by religious cleavage, and sectional hostility and isolation. So a lot of it is the fact that we just haven't joined hands with Quebec, and that there is just no way to reconcile the difference between the English and the French, and that sort of racial jealousy and that ill feeling has been carried on to this day. And I know the religious part is no longer a part of it, but they're still religiously French in a way. And I don't want to make this sound like this is attacking the French in any way, but this is there has been no effort to draw the French and the English-speaking parts of this country together in any meaningful way. All we've done is made compromises to make the rest of Canada bilingual, and that is the only thing that has really brought this country together and kept it together in any way. But that has obviously not been enough, and there's always been this separatist movement. And it has been due to isolation and sectional hostility to the rest of Canada. The unifying process can scarcely go on while these things are permitted, and the consolidation of the Dominion must yet be a long way off. If the recent movement among the national societies of Quebec in giving encouragement to the colonial schemes of old France means anything more than the arrogance and self-assertion of race, then more distant still must be the unification of the Dominion. So what this is saying is that if Quebec continues to be hostile to the rest of the country, then the unification of this country of Canada will be even farther along and will take forever. And that's what we've seen. So essentially, Canada has never gotten over his petty squabbles, and we're seeing them still play out. To contend against the separating forces in Confederation, we want, as we have said, the infusion of patriotic feeling and the diffusion of national sentiment. Through no influence more potent than literature and the literary spirit can this nationalization of the Dominion effectively operate. What he's saying here is that what we need in this country is a development of culture, and one of those things is literature. When we have Canadian authors, right? But we spend more time consuming American culture, American literature than anything else. I mean, this is a Canadian book, but when's the last time that you have read a Canadian book on Canadian history? There hardly is any. We haven't developed that sort of Canadian literature to the extent that we should have. I'm not saying that we should throw the United States out the window. Like, we're so closely aligned with the United States. We have very, very similar cultures. No, not identical, but similar cultures. So I'm not saying that we should throw the United States out or elbows up or anything like that. But we need a Canadian culture, and part of that is Canadian literature. And I wouldn't say that this is like pouring huge amounts of money into Canadian content creators or Canadian literature or Canadian art in any way. There needs to be a way that we can sort of fuel Canadian love. And part of that is Canadian literature, is what he's saying here. Nothing will better contribute to the welding process or be more potent in bringing about homogeneity and the consolidating influences the country so urgently needs than a healthy native literature and an ardent national sentiment. With these, and due encouragement given to their exercises, we may see that the various provinces of the Dominion knit more closely together in the common bonds of nationality, and sectionalism and disruptive influences dispelled as things alien. So he's really speaking to the need for national literature, which is interesting. Some difficult questions, no doubt, will remain to be faced, and not a few tendencies to be checked that look in quarter or another separation. But time and destiny are likely to work in our favor, and tact and good judgment may be trusted to do the rest. With an added 1 million or 2 to our population, in the meantime, if we do not swamp ourselves with debt, the national outlook will be less grave, and there will be more room for hope. So what he's saying is that back then in the 1890s, there was not a very large Canadian population. So earlier on in a section that I did not read, he was talking about how the United States, although I think he missed the full picture, he was talking about how the United States, with their larger population, was able to get more people and attract more immigrants, and as a result, get more developed quickly. And he thought that Canada needed that, and that the sort of colonial state and the lack of nationalism was actually preventing people from coming to the country. Although I do think there are actually a lot of things that made the United States more attractive than Canada. That could have been one of them. I'm not totally sure. But he's saying that adding more people, making it a more prosperous and economically active country, and not piling on the debt could create a much better nationalist, more patriotic society. And for a while, that seemed to work. We slowly pulled away from Great Britain, but we didn't have a lot of time to truly build a national sentiment before Pierre Trudeau came along. And I really want to highlight the things that he did, because it was basically the destruction of the development of Canadian culture. His prime ministership especially really destroyed Canada as far as culture. And if you're in the comment section and you lived through Trudeau's reign, the first Trudeau, then, and you remember the policies that he enacted, please write them down in the comments. Let me know how you think that Canada changed, whether our culture actually changed, or if things went backward. Let me know. I'll be interested to know, and I will read those comments. Okay. Pierre Trudeau, as Prime Minister of Canada, introduced official multiculturalism as a federal policy in October 8, 1971, making Canada the first country in the world to adopt multiculturalism as an official government policy. He announced it in a statement to the House of Commons as multiculturalism within a bilingual framework, deliberately combining it with the existing Official Languages Act, which established English and French as Canada's official two languages. Trudeau emphasized that while there were two official languages, there was no official culture, and no ethnic group took precedence over another. Okay, now that is interesting, but that was basically the end of any development of culture. And clearly there wasn't a strong enough Canadian culture at that time to really be highlighted. And if there was, maybe obviously if you're in the comments, again, I ask you, write down what you think about this. But clearly there was nothing very strong to prevent this sort of multiculturalism being pushed on our country. And I believe this has really prevented us from growing and building a culture, a uniquely Canadian culture. And for decades now, it is all Canada has been, oh, we're not American. That's who we are. And that's why elbows up. That's why anti-American sentiment has been so strong. That it was strong in the days of Brian Mulroney, and it's strong now. That's why the political left is so strong in the polls right now, is because they have this sort of sway and being anti-American and elbows up. And there's such a large chunk of Canada that truly believes that sort of thing. So I really found this book extremely enlightening, especially that introduction, because if we look back at what this is saying and what history has told us, there have been a lot of things that have played into Canada not having this strong culture. One of them, of course, is the division between Quebec and the English-speaking parts of Canada. That is a hugely complicated mess, and to resolve it is just beyond me. I have no idea how we would do that. But that has prevented the sort of unification and development of a strong Canadian culture. Another thing is the slow progress from being a colony to being a full nation, sovereign nation. And we're still technically connected to Great Britain, and that has prevented a lot of this culture from being introduced and from growing. Another thing is really strong government. Canada has always had a strong government, although right now it is obviously a lot stronger, but we have always had this strong government. When our government was set up, it was set up to be strong and central. And a lot of that was because they looked at the United States and said, oh, they failed. The Civil War, was when Canada was founded. And they looked at the United States and said, oh, well, that's a complete failure. We're not going to give as much power to the provinces. No way. So as a result, they set up a strong central government. And as our welfare system developed, we have been prevented basically from developing that sort of self-sufficiency that this is talking about and the development of a national sentiment. So all those things play together, and that's why we don't have a strong Canadian culture. That's why we're divided, and that's why we have so many separatist movements in this country right now. And I fully understand the people that want to separate. I fully do. But it's coming from them having a sense of independence and the rest of the country not having any understanding, not understanding what they're going through and not caring. So I fully understand it, but if we break up now, then Canada is basically over. The dream of Canada's patriot statesman, the dream of Sir John Macdonald, if we break up now, that dream is over. And if you look at his life's work, if you look at the things that he worked towards, he was extremely unifying. He brought together, even for a short period of time, he brought together the English and the French-speaking parts of Canada into a dream. He had a vision, and that was never fully executed because that division sprang up, and it has continued for so long. But for a short period of time, he did unify the French-speaking and the English-speaking parts of Canada, and it was a beautiful thing. And that was due, in part, to some outside forces, but he was an incredible man. And I don't care what the woke media says about him. He was amazing in the things that he was able to do. And having visited his childhood home in Kingston and the home that he lived in for the greater part of his life, having visited that, I am ashamed at how we portray him nowadays. There is not one good thing that you will hear about Sir John A. Macdonald by visiting his house. And this is obviously a rant, this is an aside, but if we separate now as a country, then that his life's work is done. Canada as a country is done, and we are stronger together. If Canada separates now, I cannot imagine the outside forces that are going to attack us and slowly take us over and assimilate us. Part of it might be the United States, and a greater part might be China. So I understand the separatist movements, I truly do. But if we separate now, it's over. So the only way to truly build a strong and unified country is to rebuild a sense of freedom and independence and self-sufficiency. And that is going to take reform in our government, not just by one election, but by a lot of really hard work. And part of that is going to need someone with a strong nation-building vision. Someone like Sir John Macdonald. That's someone we need right now. And you know what? He's out there somewhere and we're gonna find him. All right, so thank you so much for watching this video. That will do it for me. I am Sarah. Please like, subscribe, and comment. That will really help this channel out. And leave your thoughts down below. Let me know what you think of this whole subject. I think it's truly interesting and I would love to have a rousing debate with you in the comments. All right, bye.